The Valorian Collective had conquered 17 star systems in the last 300 years. Their ships were massive, their weapons were powerful, and their confidence in their military strength was absolute. Commander Kesh stood in his command center on the flagship Valorian Prime, looking at the data streams showing human military capabilities. He felt no concern. How could he? Humanity used chemical rockets and kinetic weapons. The Valorians had plasma cannons and energy shields that could withstand asteroid impacts. The intelligence report had come to Kesh 3 weeks ago. A new species, on a small blue planet in the outer rim, had developed space travel. They called themselves humans, and they lived on a world called Earth. Kesh had studied the report with his tactical team, and they all reached the same conclusion. Earth presented no real threat. The humans had only 12 space stations, AOEI by a handful of orbital defense platforms, and their most advanced warship used technology that the Valorians had considered outdated for over a century. Kesh made his decision quickly. The Valorian Collective would expand its reach. Earth would be assimilated into the Empire. The humans would either accept Valorian rule, or they would be destroyed. It was simple mathematics, really. Superior force always won. Kesh had seen it work 17 times before, and he saw no reason why it would fail now. The battle fleet was prepared in record time. 500 warships, arranged in perfect formation, jumped through space and emerged near Earth's orbit. They were magnificent to behold, sleek and deadly, with weapon systems that could level entire cities in seconds. Kesh stood on his bridge, arms crossed, watching the blue planet below. So small, so vulnerable, so very soon to be conquered. On Earth, Admiral Marcus Hayes sat in the command center of the United Earth Defense Force, his eyes fixed on the sensor displays. His team had been tracking the anomaly for 6 hours. Something massive was approaching from deep space, something that had just entered the solar system. The moment the sensors resolved the contacts, the room went silent. 500 ships, arranged in perfect military formation. No response to their hails. No attempt at communication. Marcus was not a man who panicked, but he understood what he was looking at. Humanity had always known that one day, first contact with an alien species might not be peaceful. They had prepared for this moment in theory, but theory meant nothing when the reality was unfolding before your eyes. He activated the emergency broadcast system and sent the signal that brought together Earth's top military strategists, scientists, and world leaders. Within an hour, the leaders of Earth's nations were gathered in the command center, watching as the alien fleet took up position in high orbit above Earth. The atmosphere was tense. Some wanted to launch their fighter aircraft immediately, knowing it would be futile but feeling that they had to do something. Others suggested trying to hide, as if 500 massive warships might somehow miss an entire planet. Admiral Marcus held up a hand. He believed in a simple truth. You could not fight an enemy you did not understand. These ships were clearly designed for conquest. Their positioning suggested they expected no real resistance. Their formation was powerful and organized, but it was also arrogant. They had arranged themselves in a way that showed their confidence, but also their assumption that Earth's people would surrender immediately. The Valorian transmission came through the speakers, and everyone in the room heard Commander Kesh's voice, calm and certain. Planet Earth, this is Commander Kesh of the Valorian Collective. Your solar system is now under our authority. You have 48 hours to surrender your world, your resources, and your government to our rule. Failure to comply will result in the immediate destruction of your population centers. We do not negotiate. We do not compromise. You will surrender or you will be destroyed. The choice is yours, but you should know that all previous species have chosen to surrender after seeing our military power. You should do the same. The transmission ended. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then Marcus stood up and did something that surprised everyone. He began to laugh. Not a nervous laugh or a laugh born from fear. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from understanding something that others had missed. His team looked at him as if he had lost his mind. The general leading the Pacific Defense Fleet asked if Marcus had suffered some kind of breakdown. The Russian ambassador demanded to know what was funny about their imminent destruction. But Marcus simply held up his hand again and asked his lead scientist, Dr. Raymond Stone, to pull up the Valorian biological data. Marcus pointed to the screen as the genetic information appeared. The Valorians were strong, yes. They had evolved as predators on a harsh world. They had developed a rigid hierarchical society built on strength and submission. Their entire psychology was based on the principle that superior force was the only principle that mattered. Everything about them, from their body language to their cultural expression, reflected this belief. Marcus explained his thinking to the room. He said that the Valorians came to them as conquerors, because that was the only language they understood. They expected submission because every species they had encountered had eventually submitted. They had never faced a species that did not respond to threats the way their biology told them species should respond. The Valorians had built their entire empire on one simple assumption: that all beings, when faced with superior force, would choose to surrender. Admiral Marcus then made a decision that would change the course of history. He contacted the Valorian Command Center and asked to arrange a summit. He offered to meet with Commander Kesh in person, with a small team, in a neutral location on Earth. He suggested they could discuss the terms of Earth's incorporation into the Valorian collective in a more civilized manner. Commander Kesh was surprised by the request, but not displeased. Meeting with human leaders might even be enjoyable. He would see their fear up close. He would watch them realize that their world was about to become part of something far greater than themselves. He would see them understand that resistance was impossible. Kesh sent a shuttle down to Earth's capital city, personally selecting the delegation that would accompany him. The meeting room was simple and clean. Long table, comfortable chairs, water and refreshments prepared by Earth's hospitality team. Admiral Marcus Hayes stood at the head of the table, his bearing calm and confident. Beside him sat Dr. Linda Foster, a leading expert in human psychology and conflict resolution. Next to her was Captain Aaron Cole, a veteran pilot who had survived 3 different military conflicts. These 3 Americans waited calmly as Commander Kesh and his delegation entered the room. Kesh was tall and imposing, with gray skin and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. His 2 attendants flanked him, their weapons visible at their sides. The Valorian commander looked at the humans and saw exactly what he expected to see: beings who understood they were facing their superiors, trying to hide their fear behind a mask of civility. Kesh began his ultimatum again, speaking with the certainty of someone who had repeated this speech many times before. He explained the terms of Earth's surrender. The Valorians would take control of Earth's government. Humans would be expected to serve the collective. Resources would be redirected to support the Valorian military and research initiatives. It was nothing personal, Kesh explained. It was simply how the universe worked. The strong governed and the weak obeyed. And then Admiral Marcus Hayes smiled and began to laugh. He looked at Commander Kesh and his team, and his laughter was genuine, warm, and completely lacking in mockery or fear. The sound of human laughter filled the room, and for the first time in his entire life, Commander Kesh felt something he had never felt before: uncertainty. Commander Kesh's yellow eyes narrowed. He did not understand what was happening. In his entire military career, no species had ever laughed at him. They had feared him. They had trembled before him. They had accepted their defeat with tears and pleas for mercy. But this human was laughing as if the Valorian commander had just told the funniest joke in the universe. Kesh's hand moved toward his weapon, but Marcus raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. The Admiral's laughter faded, but his smile remained calm and knowing. He asked Commander Kesh to please sit down, to listen for just a few moments before making any decisions. There was no threat in his voice, only genuine curiosity and understanding. Something about the human's confidence made Kesh hesitate. He had conquered 17 civilizations, but never had he encountered anything quite like this. Marcus gestured for everyone to take their seats. Dr. Linda Foster prepared a presentation on the large screen behind her. She showed Valorian biology, Valorian history, Valorian culture and society. Kesh watched with growing unease as the humans displayed knowledge of his people that should have been impossible for them to possess. They knew about Valorian childhood rituals. They understood the structure of the military hierarchy. They had studied Valorian art and philosophy. The Admiral began to explain. He told Kesh that humanity had faced many threats throughout their history. They had learned that to truly understand an enemy, You had to understand their biology, their culture, and their way of thinking. Humans had studied the Valorian data carefully, and they had come to a conclusion that might surprise the commander. Marcus leaned forward and explained that the Valorians were not as strong as they believed themselves to be. In fact, their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The Valorians had built their entire civilization on the principle that might makes right. They conquered through fear and intimidation because that was the only way they understood power. Their empire was held together not by loyalty or respect, but by the constant threat of military force. Kesh objected immediately. He said that the Valorian approach had worked perfectly for 300 years. His military had never lost a battle. His empire had never faced a rebellion that they could not crush. The human's words made no sense. Strength was weakness? How could such a thing be true? Dr. Foster spoke for the first time. She explained that human psychology was very different from Valorian psychology. Humans had evolved as cooperative creatures. They survived through working together, not through individual strength. Throughout human history, civilizations that tried to rule through fear alone eventually collapsed. The most powerful human societies were those where people chose to follow their leaders because they believed in the same values and goals. People would fight harder, work longer, and sacrifice more for leaders they respected and trusted than they would for leaders they merely feared. Captain Aaron Cole added his own perspective. He was a military man, so his words carried weight with Kesh. Cole explained that he had fought in 3 different human wars. He had seen what happened when soldiers fought for duty and respect versus when they fought because they were forced to. Soldiers who believed in their cause, who trusted their commanders, who felt that they were fighting for something greater than themselves, were far more effective in battle than soldiers who fought only because they feared death or punishment. The captain described a battle where his small squadron of pilots had defeated a much larger enemy force. They won not because their weapons were superior, but because they knew each other, they trusted each other, and they were willing to sacrifice for each other. When you ruled through fear alone, you created soldiers who would abandon you the moment you appeared weak. When you ruled through respect and shared values, you created soldiers who would follow you to the end of the universe itself. Marcus then asked Kesh a direct question. How many rebellions had the Valorian collective faced? How many worlds had needed to be occupied by military forces to prevent uprisings? How many conquered peoples did the Valorians have to watch constantly to make sure they were not plotting against their rulers? Kesh felt uncomfortable answering, but the truth was obvious. There had been many rebellions. Dozens of worlds required permanent military garrisons. Entire sections of the empire were only controlled because the threat of destruction kept the population in line. Dr. Foster explained that this was unsustainable. An empire maintained by fear was always unstable. It required constant military resources to hold it together. If the Valorians had to face a truly powerful external threat, their empire might collapse because so many of their military resources were tied up maintaining control of their own conquered worlds. But humans, Marcus explained, had a different approach. Humans would not try to fight the Valorians militarily. That would be foolish. The Valorians were too powerful, their weapons too advanced, their ships too numerous. Instead, humans were offering something different. They were offering the Valorians a choice. Kesh leaned back confused. What choice could humans possibly offer to a conquering force that held all the military advantages? Marcus smiled and explained that humans had spent weeks studying the Valorian collective carefully. They had identified something very important. There were many conquered worlds within the Valorian Empire. Many of these worlds had highly developed cultures and technologies of their own. Many of these worlds were unhappy with Valorian rule, but were too afraid to rebel. The Admiral suggested that if Earth could offer these worlds something different, if humans could propose a new way of organizing galactic society, based on cooperation instead of conquest, many of these worlds might choose to support Earth instead of the Valorians, not because they had no choice, but because they wanted to, because they believed in a better future. Kesh laughed harshly. He said this was nothing but empty threats dressed up in pretty words. He said humans were weak and desperate. They were trying to trick him with rhetoric when they should simply accept their fate. He stood up from his chair and declared that this meeting was over. The Valorian fleet would begin bombardment of human population centers in 6 hours if Earth did not formally surrender. But as Kesh stood, something Marcus said made him pause. The Admiral asked a simple question. If humanity truly posed no threat to the Valorian Empire, then why did the Valorians need to destroy them at all? Why not simply accept Earth into the collective as they had accepted all the other worlds? Why did they need to crush a species that had done nothing to harm them? Kesh turned back to face Marcus. The human admiral was smiling with an expression of complete understanding and calm certainty. Marcus said that he had studied all 17 civilizations that the Valorians had conquered. Not one of them had posed any real threat to the collective. The Valorians conquered them not because they were dangerous, but simply because they existed and the Valorians could. The admiral leaned back in his chair and made a statement that hung in the air like a physical force. He said that humans understood something the Valorians had never faced in 300 years. Humans understood that in the modern galaxy, where technology was spreading and new species were developing faster than ever before, an empire based on fear would eventually face a challenge it could not overcome through military force alone. And when that happened, the Valorians would find themselves completely alone, with no allies and no one who would fight beside them out of choice. Kesh felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. For the first time in his military career, he was uncertain. He ordered his team back to the shuttle. He told Marcus that he would return to his flagship and consult with the Valorian High Council. They would need time to consider what the humans had said. He did not promise anything, but he also did not order the immediate bombardment he had threatened. As the Valorian commander left the room, he realized that this meeting had not gone the way he had planned. He had come to crush a weak species, but instead he had encountered something that his military training had not prepared him for. He had encountered a species that understood him better than he understood himself. Commander Kesh stood on the bridge of the Valorian Prime and stared at the reports coming in from across the Empire. His tactical officers were confused about why they had not received orders to destroy Earth. They kept asking if there was a delay in communication. Kesh did not answer them. Instead, he summoned the High Council to an emergency session. The council members appeared on the holographic display, their faces showing the same confusion that Kesh felt. High Chancellor Morn, the most senior leader of the Valorian collective, asked why the commander was wasting their time with a report about a primitive species on a planet that should have surrendered by now. Kesh explained what had happened at the meeting. He described how the humans had laughed at him. He told them what the humans had said about fear and loyalty, and the weakness of empires built on intimidation alone. Most of the council members dismissed Kesh's concerns immediately. They said the humans were clearly trying to manipulate him with clever words. They ordered him to proceed with the conquest. High Chancellor Morn was about to vote on the matter when Kesh asked for 1 week of observation, before any military action was taken. He said he wanted to study human behavior and understand what they truly believed. Morn was irritated by the delay, but he allowed it. He told Kesh he had 7 days to complete his analysis. After that, Earth would be conquered with or without the commander's approval. Kesh ended the communication session and immediately began a detailed surveillance of Earth and its people. What he discovered over the next several days was startling. He watched humans of different nations and different backgrounds working together to prepare for the Valorian threat. He saw military personnel training alongside civilians. He saw scientists and soldiers treating each other with respect, not fear. He watched as humans prepared not just weapons but also food and medical supplies. They were not preparing to fight to the death with a spirit of hate. They were preparing to survive and protect their people. Kesh ordered his intelligence officers to compile everything they could about human history. They brought him thousands of historical records. He watched as humans fought through ice ages when the climate of their world became deadly. He read about human plagues that killed billions, and how the survivors continued living and building new civilizations. He studied human wars, wars that were terrible and destructive, yet humans always found ways to rebuild and move forward. The commander saw something else that disturbed him. He saw humans sometimes choosing to surrender to enemies, accepting occupation and hard times because they believed that as long as hope remained, they could one day be free again. He saw humans keep fighting against overwhelming odds because they believed in something worth fighting for. This was not the behavior of a weak species. This was the behavior of a species that understood something about survival that the Valorians did not. On the 4th day, Kesh received an unexpected message from Admiral Marcus Hayes. The humans suggested a second meeting, this time to discuss what Earth could offer the Valorian collective. Kesh was intrigued. He agreed, and soon he found himself sitting across from Marcus again, but this time the setting was different. Marcus had arranged for them to meet in a location where they could observe some of Earth's natural beauty. Through the windows, Kesh could see mountains and forests, water flowing, and creatures living their lives in the environment they had adapted to over millions of years. Admiral Marcus began by asking Kesh what he feared most. The Valorian commander initially refused to answer, but Marcus explained that he was not asking this to mock him. He was asking because he genuinely wanted to understand. Kesh thought about the question carefully. Finally, he admitted something he had never told anyone. He said that what terrified him most was the thought that the Valorian Empire, for all its strength and power, was fragile. It required constant military force to maintain it, and one day that might not be enough. Marcus nodded and said that this was exactly the revelation that the humans had hoped Kesh would reach on his own. The Admiral explained that Earth was not offering to fight the Valorians. Instead, Earth was offering to help the Valorians solve the very problem Kesh had just described. Dr. Linda Foster presented a proposal that had taken weeks to prepare. She explained that Earth had quietly been communicating with several worlds that lived under Valorian rule. These worlds were unhappy with their situation, but they had no hope of freedom through rebellion. The humans were offering to create something new, a voluntary confederation of free worlds. The proposal was radical. Instead of conquered worlds that had to be controlled by military force, there would be worlds that chose to be part of a larger organization because they benefited from it. There would be free trade between worlds. There would be shared research and technology development. There would be mutual defense, but not through occupation and threat. Instead, mutual defense would come from the genuine loyalty of allies who wanted to stand together. Foster explained that the Valorians could keep their advanced technology and their strong military. But instead of using that military to maintain control over unwilling subjects, they could use it to protect a confederation of allies. The Valorians would be stronger, not weaker, because they would have the genuine support of many worlds instead of the forced obedience of conquered ones. Kesh asked how this was possible. He said that countless worlds had tried to rebel against Valorian rule throughout history. How could humans possibly convince them to willingly join a new organization? What would stop them from simply attacking the Valorians the moment an opportunity arose? Captain Aaron Cole answered this question. He explained that humans understood something about loyalty and motivation. When people chose to support something they believed in, they became far more loyal and dedicated than people who had no choice. The worlds that joined this new confederation would do so because they saw real benefit to themselves and their people. They would support it not out of fear, but out of shared interest and mutual respect. Marcus then revealed something that made Kesh's yellow eyes widen in surprise. Earth had already begun secret communications with representatives from 8 different worlds that lived under Valorian rule. These worlds were interested in hearing more about the proposal. They were asking if there was truly a possibility of freedom and self-determination without the threat of destruction. The implications were staggering. If these 8 worlds learned that the Valorians were even considering allowing freedom and voluntary cooperation instead of forced rule, the news would spread quickly. Other worlds would begin to hope. And hope, Marcus explained, was the most powerful force in the galaxy. Kesh realized he was facing a choice that would change everything. He could report this to the High Council and recommend they crush Earth immediately to prevent any challenge to Valorian authority. Or he could take a risk. He could bring this proposal to the Council and suggest that the Valorians could remain the most powerful force in the galaxy, not through fear, but through being the leaders of a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. The commander looked at Admiral Marcus and made a decision. He said he would bring this proposal to High Chancellor Morn and the full Council. He promised nothing, but he asked for 1 more week before any military action against Earth was taken. He wanted time to convince the Council that there was a better way. As Kesh prepared to leave, Marcus offered his hand in the human gesture of friendship and trust. The Valorian commander hesitated only for a moment before taking it. The handshake between human and Valorian in that moment represented something neither species had experienced before. Genuine understanding between 2 very different beings. Commander Kesh returned to the Valorian Prime, and immediately requested an emergency session of the High Council. This time he did not simply report what had happened. Instead, he presented a full analysis of the situation, complete with military assessments and strategic projections. He showed the Council the same historical data that had affected him so deeply. He explained that humanity was not a military threat, but they represented something far more dangerous. They represented a fundamental challenge to how the Valorian collective operated. High Chancellor Morn listened without interrupting. When Kesh finished his presentation, the Chancellor asked a direct question. He asked if Kesh was recommending that the Valorians allow Earth to remain independent and that they accept this proposal for a voluntary confederation. Kesh took a deep breath and said yes. He explained that the Valorians could achieve more through this new approach than they could through continued conquest. The Council erupted in disagreement. Several high-ranking generals argued that accepting such a proposal would show weakness. They said other species would see the Valorians as soft and vulnerable. They demanded that Earth be destroyed as an example to other potentially rebellious worlds. The tension in the council chamber grew heavier with each passing moment. Then something unexpected happened. A council member named High Administrator Tresh, who controlled the Valorian economy and resource management, asked for permission to speak. Tresh had been quiet during most of the discussion, but now he stood and made an observation that changed everything. He said that maintaining the current empire was becoming increasingly expensive. The cost of stationing military garrisons on every conquered world was draining resources that could be used for research, exploration, and development. Tresh pointed out that the 17 worlds the Valorians had conquered were not providing the economic benefit they should provide. This was because so much money had to be spent keeping them under control. If these worlds could be transformed into willing partners instead of unwilling subjects, the economic benefit to the Valorian collective would actually increase dramatically. Trade would flow more freely. Technology development would accelerate. The Valorians would become richer and more powerful, not weaker. High Chancellor Morn listened carefully to Tresh's analysis. He then asked Commander Kesh a question that seemed to come from nowhere. He asked if Kesh truly believed that the Valorians could maintain their military superiority while also leading this new confederation. Kesh answered without hesitation. He said yes. In fact, he argued that the Valorians would be in a stronger military position because they would have genuine allies who would support them in any external conflict. Morn considered this carefully. He said that he would allow a provisional agreement with Earth. The Valorians would not destroy the planet, and they would not conquer it. Instead, they would enter into negotiations with Earth to develop this proposal for a voluntary confederation. However, he warned Kesh that if this turned out to be a trap or a deception, if Earth was secretly developing weapons or forming alliances against the Valorians, then the response would be swift and terrible. Kesh accepted these terms. He sent a message to Admiral Marcus, informing him that the Valorian High Council had agreed to a provisional alliance and would begin serious negotiations with Earth regarding the formation of a free galactic confederation. Over the following weeks, Ambassador Nathan Brooks became the lead negotiator for humanity. Brooks was a specialist in cross-species diplomacy, and he had spent his career studying different cultures and finding common ground between different peoples. He worked closely with Dr. Linda Foster and other human experts to create a framework for the new confederation that would appeal to both the Valorians and the conquered worlds they hoped to free. The negotiations were complex and sometimes difficult. The Valorians wanted guarantees that Earth would support them militarily if they needed it. Earth wanted guarantees that the Valorians would truly allow worlds to govern themselves and not secretly maintain control through economic pressure or threat. Slowly, through careful discussion and mutual respect, a framework began to emerge. Meanwhile, something else was happening that no one had predicted. Information about the negotiations was beginning to leak out from the Valorian collective. Conquered worlds that had lived for decades or centuries under military occupation began to hear rumors of a possibility for freedom. These rumors spread like wildfire through the galaxy. On a world called Meridian, where the population had been forced into mining labor for the Valorians, people began to believe that freedom might actually be possible. On another world called Sanctuary, where an entire population had been systematically oppressed, People began to whisper about hope for the first time in generations. On dozens of other worlds, similar conversations were taking place. The Valorian military governors on these worlds began to report that population unrest was increasing. They asked for permission to increase military presence and suppress the growing hope. But High Chancellor Morn refused these requests. He understood what was happening. The humans had been right. Hope was far more powerful than force could ever be. Commander Kesh found himself in an unexpected position. He was becoming the face of a new movement within the Valorian collective. Many younger Valorian military officers were beginning to support the idea of the new confederation. They saw it not as weakness but as a new form of strength. They understood that the Valorians could lead the galaxy into a new era of cooperation and mutual advancement. After 3 weeks of intense negotiations, a preliminary agreement was reached. The Valorian collective would gradually release its conquered worlds with the option to join the new Free Galactic Confederation as equal members. Worlds that chose not to join would be allowed to remain independent without military occupation or threat. The Valorians would contribute their military technology and scientific expertise to the Confederation as part of their membership. In return, Earth and other member worlds would recognize the Valorians as one of the founders of this new organization, and the Valorian military would serve as the primary defense force for the Confederation, protecting all member worlds from external threats. The agreement was signed in a ceremony held in Earth's capital city, with representatives from multiple species present to witness the event. High Chancellor Morn appeared via holographic transmission from the Valorian Prime. Commander Kesh stood beside Admiral Marcus Hayes as the documents were formally signed. Dr. Linda Foster watched from the audience, tears in her eyes as she witnessed the moment that would change galactic history. Kesh looked at the Valorian forces under his command and told them something they had never heard before. He told them that they were no longer an army of conquest. They were now defenders of freedom. They would stand beside species that had once been their enemies. They would work to protect a galaxy where all beings could live without fear of occupation or domination. The Valorian soldiers did not know what to make of these words at first. But as they looked around at the representatives of different species gathered together, as they understood that they were part of something unprecedented, something shifted in their perspective, they began to understand what Kesh had learned, that there could be strength in cooperation, honor in defending others' freedom, and power in being part of something greater than conquest. As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Marcus placed his hand on Commander Kesh's shoulder. The human and the Valorian stood together, looking out at a future that neither species could have imagined just weeks before. The galaxy was changing, and it was happening not through warfare or domination, but through understanding and mutual respect. 1 year had passed since the signing of the agreement that created the Free Galactic Confederation. The transformation that had begun with a single conversation between Admiral Marcus Hayes and Commander Kesh had grown into something far larger than anyone had imagined. What started as a desperate attempt by Earth to avoid invasion had become the foundation for a new era of galactic cooperation and peace. The first official council meeting of the Free Galactic Confederation was held on a neutral space station positioned between Earth and the Valorian homeworld. Representatives from 18 different species and 342 independent worlds gathered to participate in this historic event. The council chamber was filled with beings of every size and appearance imaginable. Some had scales, some had fur, some had skin that changed colors with their emotions. They all came together with one shared purpose: to build a better future for their people. Admiral Marcus Hayes was elected as one of the initial council leaders, serving alongside Commander Kesh and representatives from the other major powers. Marcus stood at the opening of the council session and looked out at the diversity of life represented in that room. He realized that humanity had not won a victory through superior weapons or military strategy. Instead, humanity had achieved something far more valuable. They had shown the galaxy that there was a better way. They had proven that even species with completely different biology, culture, and history could work together to achieve something greater than any of them could achieve alone. Dr. Linda Foster had become the chief architect of the Confederation's Cultural Integration Program. She had spent the past year traveling between different worlds, helping species learn about each other and understand their differences. Her team of human psychologists and cultural experts worked with representatives from other species to create educational programs and exchange programs. Young beings from different worlds visited each other's home planets, learning about different cultures and forming friendships that would last a lifetime. Foster had discovered something remarkable during this work. When different species spent time together, when they learned about each other's history and values, the barriers that had seemed so high and so permanent began to dissolve. Fear was replaced by curiosity. Suspicion was replaced by understanding. The Valorians, who had once seemed like invincible conquerors, were revealed to be beings with their own hopes and fears and dreams, not so different from any other species. Captain Aaron Cole had been selected to lead the new multi-species defense force of the Confederation. This force was unlike any military organization that had ever existed in the galaxy. Its members came from 17 different species, with different weapons technology and different fighting styles. Creating a unified defense force from such diverse members seemed impossible at first, but Cole was determined to make it work. He discovered that different species had different strengths. Some were incredibly strong but slower. Others were fast and agile but not as powerful. Some had excellent night vision, while others could see into the infrared spectrum. Some species communicated through sound, while others used different methods. Instead of trying to make all the species the same, Cole created a military structure that took advantage of these differences. He trained mixed teams where each species contributed their unique abilities. The result was a defense force that was far more effective than any single species military had ever been. Ambassador Nathan Brooks continued his diplomatic work, welcoming new worlds into the Confederation almost every month. Worlds that had been trapped under oppressive rule for generations were discovering that freedom was actually possible. They joined the Confederation not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They understood that by working together with other free worlds, they could achieve far more than they could achieve alone. Brooks had become famous throughout the galaxy for his ability to negotiate peace between different groups and species. He had resolved disputes between worlds that had been enemies for centuries. He had helped create trade agreements that benefited all parties involved. He had shown that diplomacy and understanding were far more effective tools than weapons and threats. The Valorian collective itself had undergone a transformation. They no longer ruled through fear and military occupation. Instead, they had redirected their considerable resources toward scientific research, exploration, and technological development. Worlds that had once been forced to send their resources to the Valorian military were now able to use those resources to improve their own people's lives. Commander Kesh had become an unexpected advocate for the transformation. He traveled between different worlds, speaking about the new philosophy of cooperation and mutual respect. Many Valorian military officers initially resisted this change, but Kesh's leadership and his genuine belief in the new approach helped them understand that being part of something greater than conquest could be just as fulfilling as victory on the battlefield. No. Of the most remarkable developments was what happened on the worlds that had been under Valorian occupation. As these worlds experienced freedom for the first time in generations, something unexpected occurred. Many of them did not hate the Valorians. In fact, as they learned about the transformation the Valorians themselves had undergone, respect grew between former oppressors and formerly oppressed peoples. Trade flourished. Friendships formed. Some younger members of different species even chose to form partnerships and families together. On the Valorian homeworld, museums were being built to tell the story of the transformation. Young Valorians were learning that true strength was not found in conquest and domination, but in the ability to inspire others to join you voluntarily. They were learning that the most powerful force in the universe was not military might, but the power of hope and cooperation. Earth had become a center of learning and culture in the Confederation. Scientists from different worlds came to study with human researchers. Artists from different species created collaborative works that combined their different artistic traditions. The United Earth Defense Force had become the foundation upon which the multi-species military force was built, with human soldiers training side by side with soldiers from dozens of other species. Admiral Marcus Hayes stood in the observation deck of the Confederation's main space station, looking out at the stars. Beside him stood Commander Kesh, and they stood in comfortable silence for a long moment. The Valorian commander spoke first. He said that when he first arrived at Earth, he believed that conquest was the only form of power that mattered. He had been wrong. He had learned that true power was the ability to inspire beings to believe in something greater than themselves. Marcus nodded and replied that this was something humans had learned through thousands of years of trial and error. Humans had tried conquest. They had tried domination. They had tried ruling through fear. Each time they had eventually discovered that these methods failed. The only approach that worked was to build societies, where people chose to work together because they believed in the same values and goals. The Admiral explained that this was why humanity had laughed when the Valorians threatened them. It was not a laugh of mockery or disrespect. It was a laugh of understanding. Humans understood that military superiority meant nothing against a species that refused to be intimidated. Humans understood that the real battle was not for control of planets or resources, but for the hearts and minds of people across the galaxy. As Marcus and Kesh watched, a new ship entered the system. It was a diplomatic vessel from another galactic region, a region that had heard about the Confederation and wanted to learn more about this new way of organizing galactic society. This was becoming a regular occurrence now. Species from distant parts of the galaxy were beginning to see the Confederation not as a threat, but as a model for a better way to live and work together. Commander Kesh turned to Admiral Marcus and extended his hand in the human gesture of respect and friendship. The two beings, so different in appearance and biology, stood together watching the future arrive. They had begun this journey as potential enemies, but they had ended it as partners building something unprecedented. The irony was not lost on either of them. Humanity had saved Earth not through superior weapons or military tactics. They had saved their world through laughter, understanding, and the profound recognition that the greatest power in the universe was not the power to destroy, but the power to transform enemies into allies and to inspire hope in beings across the galaxy. The age of conquest was ending, and the age of cooperation had begun. And it had all started with a human admiral who dared to laugh at an alien commander's threat. 2 years after the formation of the Free Galactic Confederation, something remarkable was happening throughout the galaxy. Worlds that had lived in isolation from each other for centuries were now connected through a network of trade routes, communication systems, and cultural exchange programs. The Confederation had grown to include nearly 600 worlds and represented species from every corner of known space. Admiral Marcus Hayes was giving a lecture at the Central Institute of Galactic Studies when a young student from a species called the Alterian asked him a profound question. The student wanted to know if Marcus had ever doubted his decision to laugh at Commander Kesh instead of fighting. Marcus took a moment to consider the question carefully. He explained that doubt had certainly existed in his mind when the Valorian fleet first arrived, but human history had taught him something important. Humans had learned through countless generations that understanding your enemy was far more valuable than simply having better weapons. Marcus told the young Alterian student that in the earliest days of human civilization, wars were won by the side with the strongest warriors. But as human societies developed, they discovered that wars were won by the side with the best strategies, the most loyal soldiers, and the deepest understanding of how to inspire people to fight for something beyond themselves. The Admiral explained that when he studied the Valorian data, he realized their greatest weakness was not their weapons or their military tactics. Their weakness was that they had never encountered a species that was not afraid of them. Dr. Linda Foster was working on a new project that represented the heart of what the Confederation had become. She was helping to create a universal history curriculum that would be taught on every world in the Confederation. This curriculum would tell the stories of different species, but it would also show how all beings, no matter how different, shared common values. All species wanted to protect their families. All species wanted to pursue knowledge and understanding. All species wanted to live in peace and security. Foster had discovered something fascinating during her research. The more different species learned about each other, the more they realized that their differences were actually enriching. A Valorian military strategy often relied on direct force and overwhelming power. But when Valorians worked with the Meridian species, who were natural strategists and loved complex planning, the combined approach was far more effective than either strategy alone. Humans brought adaptability and creative thinking. The crystalline species called the core brought mathematical precision and logical analysis. Every species contributed something unique and valuable. Captain Aaron Cole was facing a challenge that he had never anticipated. His multi-species defense force had become so successful that other galactic regions were asking to join the Confederation, not because they feared the Confederation's military power, but because they wanted to be part of an organization that could defend them without oppressing them. Worlds that had always been independent were voluntarily giving up some of their sovereignty to join the Confederation, because they understood that they would be safer and more prosperous as part of a larger cooperative group. Cole had to work carefully to maintain the balance of power within the multi-species military force. He made sure that no single species dominated the command structure. He created training programs that allowed soldiers from different species to learn from each other. He established protocols that required command decisions to be made by committees that included representatives from multiple species. This approach was slower than traditional military hierarchies, but it created a force that was far more creative and adaptive in actual combat situations. Ambassador Nathan Brooks had become something of a legend throughout the Confederation. He had personally negotiated the accession of 47 different worlds into the Confederation. But more importantly, he had helped resolve disputes between worlds that had been in conflict for generations. Brooks had learned that every conflict had a human element, regardless of the species involved. Every dispute could be resolved if both sides were willing to genuinely listen to each other and try to understand the other's perspective. Brooks had recently returned from a mission to a region of space where 3 different species had been in a territorial dispute for over 1,000 years. They had fought countless small battles over a cluster of resource-rich planets. Brooks had brought them together and helped them understand that by fighting each other, they were all losing out. He proposed that they could share the resources if they were willing to work together and coordinate their mining and processing operations. Within weeks, they had agreed to join the Confederation as a single group, pooling their resources and their strength. On the Valorian homeworld, a new generation of military leaders was coming of age. These young Valorians had not known the old empire. They had grown up hearing stories about the transformation their civilization had undergone. For them, cooperation and mutual respect were not revolutionary ideas. They were simply the way things worked. These young Valorians were eager to prove themselves, through service to the Confederation and through building relationships with other species. Commander Kesh had stepped down from his position as Supreme Commander of the Valorian forces, but he remained an advisor to the Confederation's Defense Council. He spent much of his time traveling between worlds, sharing the story of the Valorian transformation. He spoke to audiences on dozens of different worlds, explaining how his people had realized that their greatest strength came not from conquest, but from being trusted allies. An interesting development had occurred on several worlds where humans and Valorians worked closely together. Mixed teams of human and Valorian scientists were making breakthrough discoveries in fields ranging from physics to medicine to materials engineering. The human tendency to approach problems from multiple angles combined well with the Valorian strength in systematic analysis. Together, they were achieving things that neither species could have achieved alone. One particular project had captured the imagination of the entire Confederation. Humans and members of 5 other species were working together to establish a new type of research station that would be located at the heart of a nebula. This station would study the formation of new stars and planets, seeking to understand the origins of the universe itself. What had once been a purely theoretical proposal was now becoming reality, because species from across the Confederation were voluntarily contributing resources and personnel. Admiral Marcus Hayes was invited to speak at the opening ceremony of a new university on a world called Haven. The university had been built to be a place where young beings from different species could study together. Marcus stood before an audience that included humans, Valorians, Alterians, Quor, Meridians, and members of a dozen other species. He talked about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. Marcus explained that when he was young, humanity had always wondered if they would ever encounter intelligent alien life. When the Valorians arrived, many humans had thought that first contact might be their last moment of freedom. But instead, first contact had become the beginning of something wonderful. It had been the beginning of a journey toward understanding and cooperation that extended across the entire galaxy. The Admiral spoke about courage, but not the kind of courage that comes from being willing to fight and die in battle. He spoke about a different kind of courage. The courage it takes to meet with potential enemies and try to understand them. The courage it takes to believe that there is a better way than conquest and domination. The courage it takes to laugh when you're afraid. Because laughter is a way of saying that you refuse to let fear control you. As Marcus spoke, he noticed Commander Kesh standing at the back of the audience. The two old friends exchanged a knowing look. They both understood that they had been part of something that would echo through galactic history for generations to come. They had not just prevented a war. They had helped create a new era for the galaxy, an era where cooperation was valued more than conquest, where understanding was more important than intimidation, and where the greatest power of all was the ability to inspire hope. The university students from different species applauded loudly as Marcus finished his speech. A young Valorian student approached Marcus after the speech and told him that he wanted to dedicate his life to strengthening the bonds between different species. A young human student said she wanted to study cross-cultural communication so she could help other worlds learn to work together. A young Altarian said he wanted to become a diplomat like Ambassador Brooks. Marcus looked at these young beings from different worlds and different species, and he realized that the future was in good hands. The next generation would not carry the weight of ancient prejudices or old ways of thinking. They had grown up in a confederation where cooperation was normal, where friendship across species lines was expected, and where the greatest adventures lay not in conquest, but in exploration and discovery. The galaxy had changed not through warfare, but through the simple decision to try understanding instead of attacking.